Dr. Usman is CMO, Chief Medical Officer at Jules Pharma, holds MD from Usman Iqbal Medical College in Lahore, Masters of Public Health, and MBA from Boston University. And I just saw him giving the valedictorian, giving the address, graduate address there at BU. Medical Affairs Leader at AZ, AstraZeneca, and Head of Sanofi Oncology. Leads Jules Pharma as CMO, focusing on innovative drug development across neuroscience, oncology, rare disease, and more. Known for strategic integration of digital health, AI, real-world evidence, and patient-centered approaches. Authored over 50 publications, recognized in the Marquis Who's Who in America 2023. Influential in shaping integrated medical affairs strategies and global healthcare innovation. Dr. Roberto Araujo, Global Head of Medical Evidence Generation and Strategy of Rare Diseases at Sanofi. Expert in genetic, neurology, and neuroscience with a focus on neuromuscular disorders. Extensive experience in medical and market access roles at Sanofi, including Head of Medical and Market Access at the Learning Institute, and the Global Medical Director for Rare Neuromuscular Diseases, driving strategy for medical evidence generation in rare diseases at Sanofi, and leveraging RWE, real-world evidence, and advanced analytics to improve patient outcomes. Former founder and CEO of Clinical Research and Consultancy, Director at Reprogenetics in Brazil, Clinical Geneticist at Clínica Pequenos Grandes Doutores in Portugal, known for his dedication to fostering a learning culture and integrating current trends and technologies to achieve transformative results in healthcare. Obrigado. And our panelists, Shaju Backer, MBA, MBL, Senior Vice President, Global Head of Immunology Franchise at Sanofi, Bachelor's in Engineering from Manipal Institute of Technology, MBA in International Management from Thunderbird, and Master of Business Law from Sydney Law School. Over 15 years of leadership experience in oncology, immunology across the US, UK, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand. Notable roles include GM of Schering-Plough, AbbVie, and Merck Serono. Leads the global immunology franchise at Sanofi, driving strategic initiatives and overseeing major market operations, specializing in post-merger integration, multi-stakeholder-driven access strategies in G7 and JPAC markets, and has extensive experience with product launches, particularly in Japan. Lived and worked in multiple international locations, enhancing his global perspective and operational strategy.
Thank you for the nice introduction. And thank you, folks. So we're going to start as we talk about the challenges that we face with innovation. There is a driving force that all keeps us going for developing innovative drugs. And I think the keynote was very nice in actually providing the perspective of the prerequisites for innovation, the overall premise of innovation. And I think we can continue on that path. But also talk about the bottlenecks that we face in innovation in today's day and age. And one of the things that I would like to start the conversation with is the actual definition of innovation, and do we really have a full grasp on the whole spectrum of innovation? There's a huge reliance within pharma on mechanistic innovation, but what we all know and we can all appreciate is it's a one step forward to that, into actually making sure that there is clinical innovation for the drug as well. You can have a really good mechanism, but if you cannot harness the science and translate it into a real-world drug that can address real-world unmet needs, with the innovation aspect and the whole spectrum of it is not fully complete. And I think what we saw in the keynote, there were three key elements of clinical innovation. One is that the target product profiles should be meeting real-world unmet needs. The second aspect is the effect sizes. When it comes to efficacy, they shouldn't just be statistically meaningful, but they should also be clinically meaningful. And the third piece was the patient aspect. Like when it comes to your endpoint optimization in your clinical trial, an innovative spirit would be to expand your label with both clinical and patient-centric endpoints. And that's the most tremendous impact of innovation when you're touching on both clinical and patient-centric aspect. And I think we touched upon the fact that even patient convenience aspect within the target product profile of the label is an aspect of innovation. So with that in mind, and again, this is the overarching argument. The reason we want to talk about innovation is that we're seeing a lot of mechanistic innovation, but we're not sure, and this is something for the panel discussion to see if that is actually translating into clinical innovation. We have at least a dozen MOAs in cancer drugs right now. We're still kind of hung up on 2-3 months overall survival in most of the tumors. One of the reviews for cancer drugs specifically, FDA has a process where it actually provides accelerated approval for innovative drugs. Based on the review in the last 5 years, half of those drugs did not result in improvement in overall survival once the final phase 3 trial results were available. Not just that, they didn't even improve health-related quality of life. And in some cases, they actually ended up being toxic, and that led to ODACs and revision of the labels by the FDA. ODAC is an advisory committee, which is an independent advisory committee, and PARP inhibitors and TKI inhibitors were the ones where the label actually got revised because of limited efficacy or toxicity profile. Neurodegeneration, we are also seeing really good was taken off the market for ALS. The recent Alzheimer anti-amyloid drugs, we have Leqembi, and then we have a couple of others. EMA just refused authorization of that based on limited clinical meaningfulness in terms of effect size. And CMS has only allowed that drug, the first Alzheimer drug, to be allowed only if the physician enrolled in the RAMS program. So with that background, I would like to start the discussion with the fact that does the industry have a full grasp on the full spectrum of innovation, and how can we actually ensure that we touch upon all of the aspects of innovation while developing the drugs? It's easy to say, it's very difficult to operationalize that. What's the best frameworks that we have right now to do that? We'll start.
Yeah, I think Dr. Stilz did a great presentation defining what innovation should look like. And you start with unmet need, and we're just having a conversation. You really need to understand what's the unmet need from all three perspectives, and I think that was in your poster. You need to understand it from a physician standpoint, from a patient standpoint, and from a payer standpoint as well. And when you talk innovation, you're right, there's a pursuit of multiple mechanisms. I use IBD as an example. Today, there's nearly 14 or 15 advanced therapies that are approved for the treatment of ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. Yet the three leading companies, which is AbbVie, Janssen, and we are getting into IBD as well. AbbVie's got 3 approved products, studies in the report. They've got 3 programs, and IL-1 AB, RIP kinase, and GLP-2R agonist in development for UC. And they did 2 acquisitions last month, a TL1A agonist and Pharma. That's 8 assets, one company the leader. We have 4 programs in play, and Janssen has got 1 of 5. So the 3 lead companies alone are leading with 12 plus 5, 17 programs. Now, you could question, are the needs met? But the reality is that this is where you really need to understand the biology of the disease. You look at IBD space today, most patients last only 2 years on the mechanism they fail. Exactly. And IBD is unique in that sense, where the market has shifted. I was involved in launching the first generation infliximab, Remicade for IBD. That was 2 years ago, and I've seen the evolution over that period of time. And today, even today after 20 years, you see that the market for IBD is unique in the sense, the second line plus market is now 50% because of the losing efficacy. So that is why three companies, the leading three companies, are going ahead with some different programs. So it's truly understanding that unmet need from a patient standpoint, what the physicians are looking for when they define their treatment goals. And of course, the big question is the payer. With adalimumab now going to patent, biosimilars coming in, how do you then address the payer needs as well? And this is where we look at IBD is unique. That second line market is playing. Even if you have to step through, it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
So it's really understanding the biology of each disease. And that's why I struggle with, I never define immunology as one disease, it's multiple diseases.
Exactly.
Right? You have to look at disease by disease.
So, and good, I think getting it back, glad you mentioned payer aspect, because payers are dealing with a lot of information. I think you could point in on that aspect in terms of the payer access considerations as we launch a drug, even if there are multiple alternatives out there, but there are unmet needs as well. And the unmet needs are spread across, it's called the three Ps, the payers, the patients, and the physicians. But at the end of the day, you can have an approved drug, someone has to pay for it, and that's the payer. So in your perspective, what key challenges are we facing in driving the message of innovation with the payers? Because they are coming from a very different perspective, they have to balance their budgets. And if you are bringing this perspective of the disease biology, patient convenience, and physician preference all lining up, but still we're seeing a lot of pushback, and we have step edits, we have prior auths for all of these new drugs. How do you feel those challenges are impacting the drive for innovation?
Well, that is a great question. If I had the answer, I don't think I'll be sitting here today. But I can say from my own personal experience, we already have all the scenario laid out. We already know, we've discussed that we need to have a multi-stakeholder approach, and we need patient centricity. Because at the end of the day, this needs to translate in a direct, measurable, and understood benefit for the patient.
Mm-hmm.
This is a challenge, though. There is a lot of drugs out there who actually don't necessarily provide a benefit, but provide a stabilization on outcomes. And that notion is actually extremely hard for both payers and patients to understand. I think physicians get it, but payers and patients struggle. Like, well, I'm going through this process, I'm taking this medication, I'm going through this treatment, and I'm basically the same as I was a month ago, a year ago. So I think actually to further address that question, the definition of the unmet need needs to have this multiple stakeholders in mind from the beginning. And the evidence that is generated needs to satisfy this criteria.
We have that, as you know, in big pharma, at least they have processes in place where at the time of phase 2 you go for really scientific advice with all the big players. Even, you have Vineta, you can even take consolidated advice from Europe, from all of the HTA agencies. But so you would imagine that with that process in place and having payers at the table while you're developing a drug and getting their feedback, you want to make sure that, that process, if it's working, your drugs would represent payer aspirations. But as we pointed it out, some of the drugs do not meet payer aspirations, but they don't even meet unmet need aspirations. And so, from that perspective, I would like to know, what are the key challenges that we're facing within these organizations where, in my sense, I think it's the easy kind of a way of continuing the status quo and just churning out drugs and then worrying about their commercialization and proving they're meeting the unmet needs at the later stage. So, do you think that's a problem that we have with an organization?
It is a very big problem. I come from the rare disease space, and I can say that I'm fortunate enough to have traveled the world and know most of the patients for the diseases that I was treating at the time, or supporting the company to treat. That is a huge advantage. I knew the patients, I knew their families, I knew where they live. I went to the hospitals and I saw the challenges that they faced. So when I wanted to translate that into a strategy that could help the company to move the needle, that was in place. But I was very aware that I was fortunate in that regard. Most of these things are not readily available, and technology can be used nowadays to provide us some of the insights. And I think this is the movement that we're starting to see as we understand how the technologies can be applied and what benefit they can bring, not only to bring evidence, but also to bring insight into the design. But having the patient centricity in the design is key. And I think we may have payers, we have the scientists, we have the physicians, we have commercial, but quite often we don't have the patients at the center. And I think
And that's true because the last fit for purpose, patient-reported, label-grade endpoint in oncology was in 2012 for JAK inhibitors for myelofibrosis. Similarly, if you take the broader example, a patient-reported outcome is where patients actually provide their perspective on the drug themselves. And it's a very specialized process where patients respond to surveys, which are very strictly validated. FDA has a guidance. You can go actually on Google and see FDA guidance on PROs. That process has to start early in the clinical phase program. Most companies shy away from that because obviously it's not just additional work, but there's risk involved as well. You might suffice with the clinical efficacy aspect, but patients might think differently for your drug, and that could jeopardize the whole clinical program. But again, that's where risk taking can deliver a lot of goods at the end. But moving the direction, and Dr. To the next step is where, how about, what are the benefits of thinking differently, which means that if you think differently, Dr. Uli, that's where I believe your perspective would be. With the meteoric success that we had, the GLP-1 agonist, we can see that was a clear aspect of clinical innovation, that we met all the three aspects. The PPPs were geared towards real-world unmet needs. We saw phenomenal effect sizes, like 20% rate reduction in 3 months. The unmet needs, if you're talking hundreds of millions of patients across the globe with an ailment which is very, very hard to deal with and has triggering effect on many other comorbidities. And then the third piece was the patient-centered aspect. Like it was actual patient-centric and patient-centered impact. So just to provide you a perspective of, it was an example of thinking differently and coming up with a new class of drugs that pretty much hit all of the benchmarks of innovation and has clearly provided a very nice case study for the industry as to how we should reorient ourselves towards innovation, where, trying to deviate from herd thinking and Me-Too drugs to actually try to develop a new class of drugs. It's not easy. It's easy to say, but it requires a lot of different it's time, effort, investment, resources. But what is your perspective in terms of differential aspect of R&D development and moving towards new class of drugs rather than continuing on the status quo?
Usman, I spoke a bit to it, right? Because first of all, everything what we do is to address an unmet medical need. That's the forcing functional trajectory what we want to achieve. At the same time, that doesn't answer at the front end as a research, that's a question, where is actually the science which could lead to an answer to address an unmet medical need? I would say, GLP-1 as an example started as an academic discovery of a hormone where I think it became fairly early on clear that there are two very separate and distinct pharmacologies. Non-pharmacology leading to insulin release out of the beta cell, which led to a diabetes treatment, and then a completely separate pharmacology leading to obesity. I think we pursued this over 20 years, and it was, I think, for because those who are involved in the kind of vein only in place, especially in obesity, which later led to a breakthrough treatment. And also now with a clinical trial, like the SELECT trial, was the first time the data point that we actually when we treat obese people, that we find it like, we used this for diabetes before. As I said, there's a cardiovascular benefit. We did not notice this for obese people which are non-diabetic, that there would be a clear also cardiovascular benefit. So that is undertaking a daunting, long 5-year long clinical trial to get to a good point. And I still believe today, we continue to discover new facets of this GLP-1 biology, which is not all elements are fully understood. We undertake an Alzheimer's study, which will read out. I think there's more to be discovered. But it's not a linear, from starting GLP-1 to know where it all will land. That has not been a linear journey.
And that's the thing, where, Shaju, I would like you to provide that perspective. You provided a path which was, okay, we're going to produce drugs in the same, not in the same beginning, in the same area, and it's good to have more and more options, which is one perspective. The other perspective is, we talked about a non-linear risk-taking pathway led to a new indication, new pathway, a new hope for patients. Going back to, and let's go to, and I think you mentioned that, we have like about a dozen drugs that kind of in the same space, and if you see the main key element is disease modification, and I'm not sure if please correct me if I'm wrong, if we have seen any fundamental differences in disease modification amongst all these drugs. It's pretty much the overall premises, they're more same than different. And so the overall argument that critics are making these days is that this Me Too element, this Me Too thinking and Me Too drugs, and this earth thinking is stifling innovation. And if we could divert these resources after a certain threshold, that we have these many drugs, after a certain threshold, if we totally divert our resources towards a new way of thinking, it would be better for the patient, the society, as well as for the industry. So just wondering about your thoughts on that.
Sure. It's a really great question. We look at, you mentioned the payer piece earlier. 8 years ago, if you asked a payer, would they pay, would they pay $35,000 a year for expert treatment, they would say, no, steroids are more than patient needs. Today, atopic dermatitis is a $10 billion market. But that's where truly understanding the unmet need. From a payer standpoint, they say, yes, steroids is taken care of it. But you ask the physicians and patients, you hear a completely different story. When their patients were having steroid reactions, ending up in hospitals, and it wasn't an unmet need. And again, I'm using that as an example because it's our drug. But to your question, once we understood the biology of the human, it is first in disease, not just in AD, but it's first in disease in PN, first in disease in EOE, where it is the first FDA-approved medicine to treat EOE. The only indication where it was fourth month was asthma. Everywhere else, dupilumab. So again, understanding the biology of the mechanism allows us to take it to truly unmet, and that is what we are doing. So the IBD example that I gave you, yes, we have 4 assets in play in IBD, but IBD is only one of the areas we're looking at. We are constantly looking at which are the high unmet, and I can talk about it because we can answer at our R&D day. For example, celiac disease. We are taking one of our oxalides into that because, again, high unmet need disease areas. Another one, which is a bit early, we did a payer ad board, and it is a gastro condition. And again, the payer feedback was, no, we're not going to pay for it because, again, steroids are taken care of. But then we do the clinical ad board, we find out there is 50% of the patients are failing steroids, not staying on remission, and something means a lot of them are giving up because of reactions they have with steroids. So we've decided to take that as a forward, even the payers are, because we have the knowledge from the 8 years ago, that's exactly what we heard. Where AD was eczema, why would anybody pay for this? And today the market is very different. So again, to me, this is really understanding the disease. So two-part answer to your question. One, we look at disease by disease, understanding the unmet need, not just from a patient's and physician's standpoint, where is extremely important, but then weighing it up against each other. Does the clinical need truly outweigh and can create the need where the payer then comes to party?
So in summary, if you're going on that path of continuing to develop medications in the same space or a little different space, you got to triangulate all of the knowledge from the disease to the market, to the stakeholders, and make sure. And then I think that's the third category of innovation, which is launch innovation. And I think that comes into that perspective where you touch upon mechanistic clinical innovation, but then how do we actually? It's an aspect of there is an unmet need, but you have to create awareness on that as well. And there is a stakeholder engagement. There are companies who can do that really well, and that becomes part of launch innovation. So I believe that's really important from your perspective.
Absolutely, and we talk about atopic dermatitis, as I mentioned. Yes, we created the market, but now there are 5 agents that are approved by FDA for treating it, which is wonderful for patients. Again, not every drug works for every patient. We know that. Yet today, after we launched 2017, I believe, for AD, and since then, as I said, 5 approved medicines. So 7 years later, even today, only 1 out of 10 patients who are eligible for advanced therapy is actually on an advanced therapy. There is so much need for education, so we always talk about that. More competition is actually good because more companies are talking about the disease awareness. And like all companies, we talk to patients quite a lot. We bring patients in for various meetings we have. And the last, our global leadership meeting, our CEO's meeting, we had an AD patient come and talk to us. And I was horrified. This poor lady showed us pictures of her, the severe reaction she had to steroids. The GP told her she has a rare genetic disorder that there's no treatment for it. She was never referred to a dermatologist. And finally, when she ended up in the emergency room, that's where she got a referral to a dermatologist and diagnosed with AD. But that took her 8 years to go from an ECP setting to end up with a specialist. So there are various things at play. So that, again, to your point, educating about the disease, absolutely a big part, especially when you go into new disease areas. Oh, by the way, we get IPP wrong all the time. When we are first in disease, because you do the chart audits and you come up with certain numbers, and then we do our forecast and everything else like everyone does. And I won't go into which diseases, but there are 2 disease areas we went in. What we thought was that the peak patient numbers were on treatment within 2 years. So what happens is when you have no treatment option available for a disease, and you make it available, all of a sudden, the physicians will send the patients away by saying that I've got nothing to offer you. They start bringing them back. And all of a sudden, the peak is much bigger than what we see in chart audits. So we got it wrong so many times, even AD, by the way. And now people are beginning to. I was in China recently. The China Dermatology Association had revised their prevalence rate of. It's not that prevalence rate went down. The awareness went down. All of a sudden, the China Dermatology Association has revised the prevalence rate in China for AD.
So I think where we're landing is like, there are different paths, and at the end of the day, the end in mind with respect to innovation is not a linear path. It has different associations, and as you move forward, you learn from your successes, you learn from your failures. Many times, knowledge dissemination is the key, but also operationalization of the knowledge is also the key. But I would like to continue, we're going to now shift gears and talk about the new disciplines, both in R&D and in commercialization, which are now driving, which are now a key aspect of innovation. Previously, in ClinDev, in R&D, you would have a critical element of ClinDev. You would start with clinical development, you would pretty much end with clinical development. Now you have, biomarker analysis, you have AI, you have digital technology. As you move to commercialization, that's a all different element. But within the aspect of R&D, we have all of these new disciplines that are now every real-world evidence, HUR aspects. So those are now critical element of an R&D strategy. Because if you can bring those external perspectives into ClinDev early on, you'll be able to basically target your target product profile in the most proficient way. So how do you think leadership in R&D is actually responding to that change with respect to skill development, new competencies, and new way of thinking with respect to these two areas?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's a work in progress, and maybe a beginning work in progress. But we see a lot more openness in the leadership to understand all these elements as brilliantly put together from multiple angles with multiple competencies. And one of the issues in clinical development historically, I'm an advocate for this, has been little medical involvement in early stages. And actually within the pharma industry, medical has a privileged position because they know the patients, as I said I did, they know the HCPs and what the HCPs are thinking about. They know the health system. So this critical triad element has been missing, but I think more and more we are seeing more openness for this to happen. You know, one example is my role now, which I actually interact a great deal with clinical development to think about these problems, to define TPP, to actually correctly define the unmet need, because what we were saying here is that if you don't define your unmet need correctly, you may be going on the wrong path. And I even be provocative and say, are we treating diseases or are we treating unmet needs?
And they say once the drug hits phase 3, the ship has already left the dock. Because your ability to influence the target product profile, if you don't have all of the understanding of the disease and the market by then and being able to incorporate that into your trial design, by the time you're going to be in phase 4, your competitors are going to be catching up. So that's the most critical component, I guess.
Anyway, just I just would like to add a thought here, taking a little bit in a different direction, right? Because you asked this question about how should leaders react to a ever evolving broader tool base, right? How we can innovate. And I think in my mind there's also an element actually, what traits are we looking for when we think about innovation leaders? And sometimes I feel like there's 3 elements which is really, really important. First of all, for an innovation leader to feel comfortable in ambiguity, right? And strive in ambiguity. Then second of all, to be really deeply, truly collaborative, over controlling. And then there's the third one, resilience. So, and I think, how we think about those traits and how do we move innovation leaders in this world, I think it's actually really important.
And I would like to continue on that, and that was my probably last question because we're running out of time. One of the fantastic model of collaboration, because your presentation was touched a lot about collaboration, partnerships, and all of that. And one of the recent examples that we see was the Operation Warp Speed in COVID. That ended up, addressing all of the barriers with public, private, all of the companies coming together and actually leading a model where we had a vaccine in record time. Is it possible to replicate that model with other key critical areas of unmet need like HIV and others? And what do you think if we can actually collaborate in that model and reproduce these in many times? Because COVID was a clear example.
So I think, what I believe was really remarkable how fast barriers could have been removed when we thought about warp speed in a crisis, right? And now oftentimes I think, when we think about ecosystem innovation, which warp speed was, there is a scientific component to it. What is the science and what are the scientific ideas we want to pursue? And then there's business side. My question I sometimes have is, the science oftentimes feels like it's a little bit running ahead of the innovation we have on the business side. And I mean by this, sometimes we really struggle how to think about how can we make business innovation. And we get stuck typically on a few key questions. How do we go about exclusivity? How do we go about IP rights? And then we sit around the table and arm wrestling for 6 months.
I think
And in what we all of a sudden found out, actually, those things can actually be solved in a few days if there is a real driving force.
And again, we're running out of time, but I think just to wrap it up, the business side, I believe, was addressed pretty eloquently because all of the vaccine stakeholders ended up, and their revenues are still going on, and they were able to capitalize on that model. And again, it's not for every disease, but like HIV and other areas, we can actually, the hope is that we can replicate those models. And since we have a clear case study where we can, in recent times, in a modern model, we'll be able to replicate both the scientific collaboration as well as the business side. Do you think that's possible in other areas?
Yes, absolutely. And I just think, sometimes I wonder about all of us in the community that it takes a crisis to make a real change.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So sometimes I think in COVID when we were all saying, okay, no handshake anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question was, would the handshake come back? And yes, it did come back.
Yep. All right. So we are.
Yes, I think for you to stand up the microphone, it might be behind one of okay, there's Gonna open it up for Q&A. So feel free to raise your hand or shout, yell, something will come around with the mic.
Thank you so much for the great conversation and stuff. And it's kind of a rare to have this kind of leadership, kind of ask questions to. So I was going to ask the elephant in the room kind of question first about the IRA and what are your thoughts about this pricing issues with Medicare?
It's I can give you 5 different answers, right? Everybody has the report just came out. I'm sure you read all the headlines.
You guys are not leaders, so that's good.
Yeah, exactly. I was in a meeting today, getting our own interpretation of it. It's how you adapt. To me, that's what is more important. The way we look at development program, how we manage life cycles. So Diplomat, we have the luxury of, we are in the IRA framework, the time period 30 years, and if it's, we call the small molecule penalty, unfortunately. So if you have a small molecules, now interestingly enough, I was talking to a head of manufacturing the other day, and she was explaining to me, biologics, the complexity is actually, we can manufacture different biologics much easier. What she was explaining, the complexity of small molecules are going up significantly. When you see BCL2s in oncology, BPKIs, now coming into immunology, the complexity is going up. Yet we have a penalty, in a way, the small molecule penalty that applies to IRA. So we are relooking, how do we drive the LCM faster? So this force, sometimes, like COVID, necessarily is the number of all innovations. And to Usman's point as well, we look at TPPs and everything very differently. We have to kill fast because our window, once we hone in on our anchor indication, which is our first indication, we have very little time for finalizing our LCMs. So we are now beginning to kill. These assets haven't even launched yet. We have started our first lead indication, the clinical trials are in phase 2, and we're looking at LCMs, and we've already begun to kill some of the LCMs because we know we won't make it in time for IRA. And then don't forget also the diseases you've got to look at. For us, for example, AD and asthma, younger patient population, so you don't have a lot of exposure to Medicare Part A and Part B. So there, again, we look at it at a disease by disease, and we go, okay, let's take some chance there because we won't have too much of IRA exposure. So we are relooking our entire development program because of IRA. So hopefully it's not a direct answer to your question, but the impact of it for us.
The holistic piece is, I don't know if you saw the CMS guidance for the next 50 drugs. The first element of that is where they will provide the criteria that they provided was the first one is which is going to be the basis of the price negotiations, the number of alternative drugs in that space. And it kind of ties to what we discussed right now about new indication versus me too and all of that. So it all anchors on all of that. I think your point is really the most important thing. I think is because IRA is just it's not government. Right now, payers are going to adopt the same line. It's going to have a ripple effect. But I think the most important thing is our ability to actually drive the early kill aspect in R&D, and with the tools like digital technology, digital endpoints, AI, and all of that. Now we are in a much better position from a strategic as well as from a technical standpoint to go for an early kill at the portfolio level as well as the indication level. So,
Any other questions during the audience Q&A? Or do you want to move to? You want to ask?
I was wondering if you have any other additional perspective on IRA, because that's
And then, well,
an elephant in the room, and I'm glad you brought it up. Any quick?
Well, I think we would have to look at it as an opportunity rather than a challenge. Right? And from all the points that we've got here now, I clearly see it as can be a great opportunity. Anything that can generate efficiency, that can focus, and can make us more targeted, it's a win, and it's a win for the patients.
Nothing to it.
Next question.
Great, thank you. Great panel, as well as great keynote speech by Dr. Uli. And one of the questions that I actually have is, especially considering the making when it comes to metabolic disease as well as other cardiovascular disease, I was quite surprised to hear that there is less than 2% of funding when it comes to these areas, and almost 10 years the cardiovascular mortality index or all the other parameters show that all these unmet needs would tremendously increase, and that is shared by the 3 Ps for sure: patients, providers, for sure, or with the payers as well. So why is it's kind of like a hard time trying to understand why is it not that much given a huge emphasis considering all these factors?
I spoke to it, right, where how the environment was 5 years ago, and I think part is where science has driven us, right? Since the sequencing of the human genome, there's a lot of effort went into genetically driven diseases, whether this has been oncology or rare diseases, and so the more multifactorial, chronic, complex diseases took a little bit backstage from this perspective, and then large complex clinical trials, very capital intensive, where the investor community was not so keen on to embark on it. So I think that are some of the driving features. Now I think, of course, I think there is kind of a new look at this. Part of it is driven with the GLP-1 franchise, and there is an awakening that there is actually a really, really large group of people living with those conditions and a very high unmet medical need. So I would think we will see more investment flowing into this area now.
Isn't that trend changing in the last 2 years with less money now going to oncology and more into chronic disease areas, and that trend is now moving forward?
Yes, I think we see a shift occurring now.
Thank you. So I'm a RWE scientist, so a little bit different. And I was recently at a large payer in the US. And I did some research specifically around like AD and asthma and some other conditions, right, you talked about. And we saw that a lot of providers were still continuing to do long-term OCS use. despite all of the treatments that were available and that were actually covered within, our formulary. And so I think Usman talked about this a little bit about like the launch innovation. So how do you guys think about diffusing your innovations throughout the provider community, especially the PCPs, who are bombarded with all these different therapeutic areas, new therapeutic options, and ever-changing guidelines?
Yeah, this is, if we can solve for that, I think we will see a significant difference in outcomes, right? So asthma, I was leading that program as well, and the advanced therapeutic penetration in the US is 17%, by the way. So 83% of patients who are eligible based on their conditions today, it's actually, you're right, they are cycling on CS and not getting the medication they need to do. And a big part of that comes from, you're right. Recently we were at Mount Sinai, we had a whole day workshop with them, and we're having the same discussion. And there's, people talk about, oh, we should just educate them. But think about it from a PCP standpoint. The vast type of diseases and patients they're seeing on a daily basis. And imagine every chronic disease you're trying to educate them on. It is very tough. It is not an easy thing to do. Companies have tried. We still continue to try, by the way. But it is not an easy thing to solve. I used to work in Hep C once upon a time. Same thing. And we even tried, but to reach the number of, because a PCP might have 1 or 2 patients. So to reach that one PCP, for that Hep C patient to be referred to an advanced therapy to a specialist, it's very difficult. But now with the advent of AI and targeted approach, there's hope. Because end of the day, PCP is also concerned the same way as we are. We're on our mobile and all those things. So we're now looking at AI-based approaches to identify, through the patient profiles, the areas they are in, for example, looking at their chart audits and determine, could we target them more efficiently to educate them on. But the challenge then again is also educating them on the advanced therapies are moving, and again, I'm not here to talk about our portfolio, but you brought up asthma, we just presented data that was ATS on a first oral therapy that literally, it's a phase 2 data, symptom completely under control. The clinicians are excited about it, but we are saying, you've got to treat mild to moderate patients to get them symptom complete, and off OCS, we showed that in our phase 2. But we know payers are going to be, the patient numbers just get blown out. So we are trying to identify a high-risk population within that. And it's an oral medication, so there are technologies that are emerging now to achieve exactly that. But then again, it goes back to how do you educate the PCPs. For our clinical trial, we are going to phase 3 with this trial, that's where we're at Mount Sinai. And we're asking them, how do you even recruit these patients? They're sitting at the PCP's office right now. Unfortunately, they have a network. So we are even trying to solve for our clinical trial how to access these patients. But yeah, we are hoping with the advent of new technologies, we should find more efficient ways to reach the PCPs and inform them of other treatment options and refer them at the right time as well.
And this is a great point. So technology can and is being used to allow us to have that insight and look and understand differences in geographies. We go in the US, that it's not the same in one state from another. And that's because there are policies. And that's because some of the clinics also have their own policies. So once you understand what is happening and where it is happening, the next question is why is it happening? And then targets those education activities towards the root cause of the why. So a little bit of technology, a little bit of insight gathering, and then strategic action to actually change the needle of everybody.
A sophisticated and rigorous R&D strategy should be able to profile the high-risk patients that we talked about, and also the physician landscape. There are early adopters, you want to target those. Then you have physicians who sit on the P&T committee and have peer engagement, you want to target those. So I think, as you pointed out, if you have a sophisticated, rigorous RWE strategy, you can translate it into a launch innovation strategy and step by step do it, right? It's not easy, but it requires a lot of rigor and sophistication. Luckily, we have the tools these days to do it. I think we're what is it? Are we done? We're done.
Yes, so thank you.